When you picture a Western, what images first come to mind? Dusty landscapes, a lone rider silhouetted against a setting sun, perhaps that iconic haunting whistle, or a gritty stare that promises a showdown.
Hmm.
What's truly fascinating is that for many of us, those instantly recognizable sounds and visuals didn't actually originate in Hollywood.
Precisely. And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
The spaghetti Western. It's a term that's, well, it's so much more than just a quirky name for a movie subgenre. It represents a global cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, this deep dive is all about pulling back the curtain on the spaghetti Western. We're going to use your sources to unpack what these films truly are, where they came from, and why this distinctly European take on the American West left such a surprising and, well, enduring mark on global culture.
Right.
Our mission really is to understand how a seemingly niche genre became such a groundbreaking powerhouse.
And to really set the stage, it's critical to understand that these weren't merely American Westerns filmed in Europe. They deliberately challenged, criticized, or even demythologized many traditional U.S. Western conventions.
So it wasn't accidental?
No, not at all. It was a conscious artistic choice,
Yeah.
born from a different cultural lens.
Okay, let's unpack this then. So, spaghetti Western, where did that name even come from? It sounds like someone just, well, made up on the fly.
It pretty much was. The term was actually coined by a Spanish journalist, Alfonso Sanchez Martinez, back in 1966, I believe. He used it as a playful reference to Italian food because, as you might guess, the primary producers and directors of these films were Italian.
That's such a clever, informal way to name a subgenre. Really gets to the core of it, doesn't it?
It does.
Were there other names for these films besides spaghetti Western? I imagine there must have been.
Oh, absolutely. Loads of them. In Italy, they were known as Western all'Italiana, literally Westerns in the Italian style. Germans often called them Italo-Westerns. And in Japan, you might hear macaroni Westerns or even meatball Westerns.
Macaroni Westerns, okay. So truly international from the start, not just in its various names then. How far did this international collaboration extend in the actual productions?
It was incredibly collaborative. The vast majority were international co-productions. While Italy and Spain were definitely the main players, you'd also find involvement from France, West Germany, Britain, Portugal, Greece, Yugoslavia. Even the United States chipped in sometimes.
Really?
Yeah. Between 1960 and 1978, over 600 European Westerns were made. And Italy alone dominated, producing nearly 500 of those. That's a staggering volume.
That is a huge output. Wow. And what did a typical production team look like, given all those different nationalities floating around?
Well, a typical team would often feature an Italian director, an Italo-Spanish technical staff, and a truly multilingual cast. You'd often see Italian, Spanish, sometimes West German, and American actors all working together.
So how did that work with the language barriers?
Because the sound was post-synced, meaning the dialogue was added in post-production, allowing actors to speak their native languages on set. Most of these Western all'Italiana don't actually have one official dominant language.
That's wild.
It is, isn't it? Actors delivering lines not knowing what language they'd end up speaking on screen.
It really is. And you mentioned they were mostly low-budget productions. How did they manage to get that authentic Wild West feel then? Did they build all their sets from scratch, or?
Most were shot on pretty tight budgets, yes. Key locations included Cinecittà Studios in Italy and extensively in Spain. The Tabernas Desert and the Cabo de Gata Nisa Natural Park in Almeria were particularly popular because their dry, arid landscapes closely resemble the American Southwest and northern Mexico.
Right, you can totally see that resemblance. So it makes you wonder if any of that movie magic, those temporary towns and sets, actually survived the years. Did any of those old sets last?
You'd be amazed. Not only did some survive, but they now operate as theme parks. Places like Texas Hollywood, Mini Hollywood, and Western Leone.
No way.
Yeah. And what's even cooler is that they're still used as film sets today. Beyond Spain, other Italian locations included Valle d'Oltrea, Camposeco, Gran Sasso, Tivoli's Quarries, Sardinia. Oh, and there's an outlier. God's Gun was actually filmed in Israel.
Israel. Okay, that's unexpected. So these places became almost like living museums of the genre. That's incredible.
Pretty much, yeah.
So we have this distinct vision, low budgets, global cooperation. But before the spaghetti boom really kicked off, how far back do these European roots actually go? You hinted they were older than people might think.
You might be very surprised. European Westerns are almost as old as filmmaking itself. I mean, the Lumiere brothers had their first public film screening in 1895, right? And by 1896, Gabriel Vere had already shot Repas Indien for them. The genre was there practically from the very beginning.
Wow. So the idea of a Western was already percolating in Europe long before the cinematic explosion we're talking about.
Indeed. In Italy, Giacomo Puccini's 1910 opera La Fanciulla del West, The Girl of the West, is sometimes cited as the first spaghetti Western, even though it's opera.
Right. Predating the films.
Exactly. Then, in early Italian silent cinema, you had films like La Voce del Song, and get this, an intriguing 1913 Western vampire hybrid called La Vampira Indiana.
A Western vampire hybrid. Seriously.
Seriously. And it was directed by Sergio Leone's father, Vincenzo Leone, and starred his mother, Bice Valerian.
No way. Directed by Leone's father and starring his mother. The seeds were truly planted deep in that family's DNA then.
It seems so. And there were other early European examples outside Italy, too. You had German backwoods westerns, featuring Bela Lugosi, among others.
Okay.
But after World War II, the European Western setting mostly pivoted towards comedies or musicals. A cycle of Western comedies really kicked off around 1959 with films like La Tarifa and Il Terrore dell'Oklahoma.
So they were already playing with the genre, even satirizing it, before it became this gritty global phenomenon. Interesting. How did Spain specifically become such a major filming hub then? Was it just the landscape?
The landscape was key, but it also started with American and British Westerns being filmed there. Big productions like The Sheriff of Fractured Jaw in '58 and Savage Guns, which was a British-Spanish co-production, helped establish Spain as an ideal, cost-effective location for European Westerns. They proved it could be done well there.
Gotcha. So with all these prior efforts in the established locations, what really kicked off this spaghetti era? Was there one single film that truly ignited the phenomenon that changed everything?
Absolutely, without a doubt. Well, 1964 was definitely the breakthrough year. I think there were over 20 Italian productions. It was Sergio Leone's A Fistful of Dollars that truly brought the innovations in cinematic style, music, acting, and story that really decided that spaghetti westerns became a distinct subgenre.
Yeah.
That was the game changer.
Ah, the Leone Revolution. Okay, let's dive into A Fistful of Dollars and its profound impact. What was it about this 1964 film that made it so definitive?
Well, its immense commercial success was obviously a huge factor, but it was really Leone's vision. He introduced this incredibly distinct visual style, known for those iconic, dramatic, extreme close-ups on faces, the squinty eyes, the twitching lips.
Hints.
Incredibly intimate and intense, exactly.
And the music. Ennio Morricone's score is just iconic, doesn't even cover it. It defines the sound of the genre as much as the visuals do.
Totally. Morricone's innovative music was unlike anything heard in westerns before. It expressed this unique duality, right? Mixing quirky, unusual sounds and instruments like whips, whistling, electric guitars, even a human voice used as an instrument, with this almost sacral, dramatizing feel for the big confrontation scenes. It just elevated the tension and the emotion like nothing else.
Absolutely. And then there was Clint Eastwood as the man with no name. He wasn't your typical clean-cut hero, was he?
Not at all. He was the quintessential anti-hero.
Yeah.
Unshaven, sarcastic, almost insolent, driven purely by his own personal gain, mostly money. His look became instantly iconic. The squint, the cigarillo, the poncho. He embodied a whole new kind of Western protagonist.
And what was the core of that plot? How did it feel so revolutionary compared to what audiences were used to seeing in, say, John Wayne movies?
Well, the story saw this lone hero enter a town ruled by two brutal outlaw gangs. He cunningly played them against each other, primarily for money. He'd maybe assist a threatened family along the way, but then he gets severely beaten when his treachery is exposed, only to ultimately return and defeat the remaining gang.
Right.
The interactions ranged from this dark cunning and irony to surprising moments of pathos and then just raw, brutal violence. It was a very different feel.
That commercial success must have opened the floodgates for imitation then. Did the industry just start copying Leone's template wholesale?
It certainly did. The industry eagerly adopted Leone's innovations. Most subsequent spaghetti westerns tried to feature a ragged, laconic hero with superhuman weapon skill, and often specifically designed to resemble Clint Eastwood. Actors like Franco Nero, John Garco, Terence Hill, they all started out embodying that kind of archetype.
So the man with no name became the template. Got it. What other recurring tropes emerged from this initial wave of imitation?
You'd often see the hero joining an outlaw gang with some kind of secret agenda, like in Pistol for Ringo or Blood for a Silver Dollar. There was almost always a flamboyant Mexican bandit, often played brilliantly by Thomas Millian or Fernando Sancho, and you often got a grumpy old man sidekick, frequently an undertaker, for a bit of comic relief maybe. The portrayal of female characters shifted too, with young Latin women desired by dangerous men. becoming prominent, moving away from more traditional archetypes like the schoolmarm.
Right.
And a key element, really defining, was the heightened ruthlessness of the villains and the merciless brutalization the hero often faced before getting revenge.
Did any of these early films try to blend Leone's new style with more traditional American Western elements, or was it a clean break?
No, absolutely, there was some blending initially. Some films mix these new devices with elements borrowed from traditional U.S. Westerns. For example, Sergio Corbucci's Minnesota Clay came out just 2 months after A Fistful of Dollars, and it still featured a more American-style, tragic gunfighter. Similarly, Johnny Oro had a traditional Western sheriff alongside a mixed-race bounty killer. They were still, finding their footing, figuring out the formula.
Okay. So, from the lone antihero, the genre then began to evolve, bringing in partnerships and new types of characters. After A Fistful of Dollars, Leone's second Western, For a Few Dollars More, was apparently even more successful, right?
It was, yeah, a huge hit. And after its release in 1965, the profession of bounty hunter became the choice of occupation of spaghetti Western heroes. You saw it everywhere in films like Arizona Colt and $10,000 for a Massacre.
And wasn't that the film that introduced the musical watch?
Yes,
Yeah.
it popularized the musical watch as this unique, almost iconic plot device. Such a cool touch.
It really was. And this is where we start seeing those hero pairs emerge, often with conflicting motives, like you mentioned.
Precisely. For a few dollars more, Eastwood's a still unshaven bounty hunter forms this uneasy partnership with Lee Van Cleef's character, the very sophisticated Colonel Mortimer, who's older, more refined, but also driven by revenge.
Lee Van Cleef, another icon.
Definitely. And this dynamic of a younger hero learning from or clashing with an older, more experienced one was then widely adopted in films like Day of Anger and Death Rides a Horse, both of which also starred Lee Van Cleef. He kind of became the go-to older mentor foil figure.
That mentorship or rivalry theme is interesting. Then there's a specific subgenre that developed from these hero pairs, the ones known as Zapata Westerns. What were those all about? They sound political.
They often were. The Zapata Westerns were a distinct variant of the hero pair. Usually a revolutionary Mexican bandit and a mostly money-oriented American from the United States frontier. Key examples include Damiani's A Bullet for the General and Sergio Leone's fantastic trilogy, The Big Gun Down, Face to Face, and Run, Man, Run.
What's truly fascinating here, as you said, is that these films weren't just about adventure. They often carried a significant political edge, didn't they?
They absolutely did.
Yeah.
They are frequently interpreted as a leftist critique of the typical Hollywood handling of the Mexican Revolution and of imperialism in general. Looking at it from a different perspective, Sergio Corbucci's The Mercenary and Compañeros, Julio Petroni's Tepepa, they all fall squarely into this politically charged category.
Right. Okay, so next in the Leone trilogy was The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which took that hero-villain dynamic and sort of relaxed it even further, introduced a theme of universal betrayal, I read.
Exactly. In that film, all three main characters, the good, the bad, and the ugly, were primarily driven by money, blurring those traditional hero-villain lines almost completely. This led to a theme of universal betrayal cropping up in subsequent films, where characters would repeatedly form alliances and betray each other for monetary gain. Think Any Gun Can Play or $1 Too Many.
Okay.
This era also brought about the Sabata and Sartana film series, featuring heroes kind of molded on Lee Van Cleef's Mortimer character, sophisticated, skilled, but driven by acquiring riches, often using more outrageous trick weapons rather than personal vengeance.
Trick weapons. Love it. And outside of Leone's own trilogy, Sergio Corbucci's Django stands out as another incredibly influential film, really defining that tragic hero archetype.
Oh, definitely. Corbucci's Django from 1966 was one of the most violent spaghetti westerns, really pushed the boundaries. Its titular character famously dragging a coffin around.
Right.
He's torn between several motives. Is it money? Is it revenge? And his choices ultimately bring misery to him and to a woman close to him. It's quite bleak.
And the influence was huge, right? Didn't the name Django itself become almost like a brand?
It really did. The film was so influential that Django became a common hero name in a plenitude of subsequent westerns. Over 30 films used the name, maybe even 47 if you count German titles. It was just shorthand for that kind of character.
Wow. So a single name became shorthand for a whole type of character. That's a powerful legacy in itself.
Precisely. This period also saw the emergence of prodigal son stories, where a hero returns home to confront past issues, like Franco Nero's roles in Texas, Adios in Massacre Time, or later in Kioma. And the theme of the wronged hero who becomes an avenger also became extremely popular, appearing in many commercially successful films like Death Rides a Horse and Leone's own epic Once Upon a Time in the West.
So we've seen the genre get darker, more complex, certainly more violent, but then it took this really unlikely, almost jarring turn towards comedy. What happened there?
It's interesting. By 1968, the wave of spaghetti westerns had actually reached its peak, comprising something like one-third of all Italian film production.
Mm.
But by 1969, it plummeted down to one-tenth. The market was getting saturated, maybe.
Yeah, perhaps.
However, Enzo Barboni's They Call Me Trinity in 1970 and its sequel, Trinity Is Still My Name, became these massive, unexpected box office successes and gave Italian filmmakers a completely new, much lighter model to follow.
And this is where the iconic duo of Terence Hill and Bud Spencer came in, right? Creating a whole new vibe for the Western.
Exactly. Terence Hill played the quick, charming, but incredibly lazy Trinity, and Bud Spencer played his big, strong, and perpetually irritable brother, Bambino. Their film shifted to these burlesque comedies that playfully lampooned stereotypical Western characters. And crucially, there were few or no killings, a drastic change from the earlier, often ultra-violent films.
So they basically moved away from the intense gunplay that defined the genre earlier. How did they even explain that in the stories, in a genre built on shootouts?
Well, the Trinity-inspired films often included religious groups, or at least priests, who advocated pacifism, kind of providing a narrative reason for the absence of gunplay. The music also changed significantly, shifting to a lighter and more sentimental mood to match the comedic, feel-good tone.
Okay, that makes sense. But this raises an interesting question. How did critics react to this comedic shift? Did they embrace it, or did they kind of miss the grittier origins?
Yeah, some critics definitely deplored these post-Trinity films and their soundtracks. They saw them as the generation of the real spaghetti westerns. They missed the grit, the violence, the style of Leone and Corbucci, and saw the comedic turn as, well, selling out maybe. A step
Yeah.
backward anyway.
I can see that perspective. So it sounds like the genre had a good, intense run, but eventually sort of faded out after the comedy boom peaked. What happened in its twilight years?
Yeah, by the end of the 1970s, the various types of spaghetti westerns, the gritty ones, the political ones, the comedies, had largely lost their mainstream audience appeal, and production just ground to a virtual halt. There were some belated attempts to revive it in the 80s, like the comedy Buddy Goes West with Bud Spencer, or a 3D Spanish-American co-production called Comin' at Ya, and even Django Strikes Again with Franco Nero returning.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but they couldn't really reignite the genre back to its former glory. The moment had passed, it seemed.
So it seemed to die out as a major production force. But a genre with this much personality and innovation must have left more behind than just a memory. What about some of the surprising themes and connections that aren't immediately obvious? You know, the kind of deep cuts that make you go, wait, what?
Oh, definitely. For instance, some films that weren't big commercial hits at the time have gained significant cult status over the years, often due to extraordinary features in story and/or presentation. Think of really weird ones like Django Kill, which has surreal, almost horror elements, Blind Man with a blind gunfighter, or the notoriously brutal Cutthroats 9. These were often much weirder, more experimental films.
Interesting. And how did they handle things like historical figures or Native Americans compared to traditional U.S. Westerns? Was there a similar focus on historical accuracy or the usual tropes?
It's quite different, actually. Interestingly, very few spaghetti westerns, especially after A Fistful of Dollars, bothered featuring historical characters like Buffalo Bill or Wyatt Earp. They largely created their own fictional worlds and characters. And when Native Americans did appear, which wasn't that often, they were more often portrayed as victims of discrimination than as dangerous foes. That's a notable contrast to many U.S. Westerns of the time. Burt Reynolds actually starred in one called Navajo Joe, where the Native American protagonist is an avenger, dealing mainly with Anglo and Mexican villains, not other Native Americans.
That is a significant difference. But the surprises don't stop there, do they? Beyond the gunfights and the grim heroes, these films apparently drew on sources you'd never expect for a Western. I'm talking ancient myths and classical literature, really.
Yeah, it's truly fascinating, yeah. Several spaghetti westerns drew inspiration directly from classical myths and dramas. You had titles like Phaedra West, obviously referencing Phaedra, and Johnny Hamlet, which is exactly what it sounds like, Shakespeare's Hamlet transplanted to the West.
Hamlet as a Western, wow.
Yep. And The Forgotten Pistolero was based on the vengeance myth of Orestes. The return of Ringo had strong similarities to Homer's Odyssey, the hero returning home in disguise. Even Fury of Johnny Kidd apparently took cues from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. So
Yeah.
they were pulling from some pretty highbrow sources.
That's incredible. And you mentioned musicals earlier. Some were actually musicals. How did that even work in a Western setting?
Yes, it was another unexpected twist. Some Italian Western films were made specifically as vehicles for musical stars. You had Rita of the West, featuring the Italian pop star Rita Pavone alongside Terence Hill, interestingly enough.
Okay.
Even Ringo Starr, yes, the Ringo Starr, appeared as a villain in Blind Man. And the French rock and roll veteran Johnny Hallyday starred in The Specialists. It just shows how flexible and sometimes bizarre the genre could be.
Ringo's star as a Western villain. That's quite a mix. But perhaps the biggest, most surprising connection has to be the one to East Asian cinema. And this is where it gets really interesting, raising that important question about where inspiration ends and where, well, something else begins.
It certainly does, and it's a crucial part of the story. Sergio Leone's A Fistful of Dollars was, let's say, closely based on Akira Kurosawa's samurai masterpiece, Yojimbo.
Right, the plots are very similar.
Extremely similar. So similar, in fact, that Kurosawa actually sued Sergio Leone for plagiarism, and Kurosawa won. He was ultimately compensated with the exclusive distribution rights to the movie in Japan, along with a percentage of the worldwide profits. It's a clear instance of significant direct influence bordering on remake that literally changed the distribution landscape for that film.
Wow, I didn't realize he actually won the suit. That's major. Were there other influences from Japanese cinema?
Yes, other films showed traces. Requiem for a Gringo, for example, has elements that seem inspired by Masaki Kobayashi's samurai film Harakiri. The influence was definitely there.
And later, they even brought martial arts directly into the Western, which seems like such a natural fit in hindsight, combining two action genres.
That's right. As Asian martial arts films gained popularity worldwide in the 70s, spaghetti Western producers started directly, including martial arts sequences in their films, often performed by actual Eastern actors. Good examples include Chen Li in My Name is Shanghai Joe, or Lo Li teaming up with Lee Van Cleef in The Stranger and the Gunfighter. East literally met West.
Fascinating blend. We also talked about the Zapata Westerns having a political slant, but were there other films with clear political undertones beyond just the focus on the Mexican Revolution?
Yes, definitely. Some spaghetti westerns incorporated political overtones, particularly from the political left, reflecting the turbulent political climate in Italy at the time. Requiescat, for instance, featured the famous Italian author and film director Pier Paolo Pasolini playing a priest who espoused liberation theology, focusing very clearly on the oppression of poor Mexicans.
Pasolini was in one?
He was. And another film, The Price of Power, served as a pretty direct political allegory about the assassination of John F. Kennedy and tackled issues of racism in America.
So they weren't afraid to get political. And for something even more niche, and probably quite rare for the time, there was even some queer subtext occasionally.
Yeah, while it was generally very marginal, open homosexuality was sometimes intimated or hinted at in a few films, like the aforementioned Django Kill or Requiescat. However, Giorgio Capitani's The Ruthless Four was a notable exception that apparently featured more explicit homosexual relationships between some of the main characters. So it wasn't entirely absent, just uncommon.
Okay. So what does all of this tell us then about the enduring legacy of the spaghetti Western? How did a genre born from low budgets and a uniquely European perspective on an American mythology end up influencing so much of global culture? It seems much bigger than just a footnote.
Oh, much bigger. The truth is, spaghetti westerns have left their mark on popular culture, strongly influencing numerous works produced in and outside of Italy. They didn't just imitate, they innovated, creating a distinct style, visually, musically, narratively, that echoed across different mediums and continues to echo today.
Right. Clint Eastwood himself, for example, clearly incorporated elements of spaghetti westerns into his first American Western film as a director, Hang 'em High. He took what he learned from Leone and brought it back home, so to speak.
Absolutely. And Quentin Tarantino is perhaps the most vocal and obvious proponent of the genre today. He has openly utilized spaghetti Western elements in pretty much all his films, hasn't he? From Kill Bill, where he explicitly combined them with kung fu movies, to Inglourious Bastards, Django Unchained, obviously, The Hateful Eight, and even Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He wears his influences on his sleeve.
He really does. And beyond specific filmmakers, the homages are just everywhere, aren't they? You can see it in mainstream film, animation, even video games.
They really are. The Back to the Future trilogy, particularly the third film set in the Old West, pays very clear homage. The American animated film Rango features a Spirit of the West character who is basically an elderly man with no name, complete with a voice. Japanese cinema gave us the ramen western Tampopo, which is a brilliant food comedy structured like a western, and Takashi Miike's wild sukiyaki western Django.
And Bollywood even created its own version, curry westerns.
Exactly. Bollywood produced curry westerns or dacoit westerns, like the massive hit Sholay, which consciously combined conventions of Indian dacoit films with spaghetti western tropes. Even the Soviet Union had its own take with Austerns, or Easterns, replacing the Wild West with settings in the Caucasus steppes, like the classic White Sun of the Desert. It truly was a global phenomenon with local variations.
That's amazing. And you can literally hear its influence in music and see it directly replicated in video games today.
Absolutely. The American heavy metal band Metallica famously uses Ennio Morricone's The Ecstasy of Gold from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly to open all their concerts. It's iconic.
Yeah.
Other bands like Tango Saloon and Ghoul Town draw heavy influence. Muse's music video for Knights of Sidonia is pure spaghetti western pastiche. Even Big Audio Dynamite sampled Leone's films back in the 80s. And in video games, it's undeniable. Rockstar Games explicitly utilized aspects and paid loving homage in their hugely successful Red Dead Redemption series, as well as its predecessor, Red Dead Revolver.
They absolutely nailed the feel. And finally, perhaps a clear sign of its lasting significance is its academic recognition now. It moved beyond just being seen as a B-movie footnote or a quirky fad.
Precisely. In 2007, the prestigious Venice International Film Festival held a major retrospective specifically to pay homage to the genre, showing 32 different films. That kind of recognition really signaled its respected place in overall cinema history. It finally got the critical respect it deserved.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's try and unpack this then. The spaghetti western, born from humble budgets and this uniquely European, often Italian perspective on American folklore, it really transcended its origins, didn't it? It didn't just imitate. It fundamentally innovated, shaping cinematic style, character archetypes, musical scores, and narrative themes in truly profound ways.
It really did. It proved that sometimes, to truly understand a classic genre, you have to look beyond its traditional borders, see how other cultures interpreted and reshaped it.
So when a genre born out of imitation ends up defining its own powerful rules, influencing everything from global blockbusters to hit video games decades later, it really makes you wonder what other shortcuts to being well-informed, what other seemingly niche cultural corners are out there right now, waiting to surprise us with their unexpected depth and lasting impact. What forgotten corner of culture might just be shaping the art of tomorrow?